And welcome back. Welcome back. We're finally here to talk about one of the most controversial aspects of the new Fujifilm cameras lineup, and that is the autofocus. Well, the autofocus has always been controversial, but for the X-H2s, it's been even more than that because on one hand, Fuji claimed that the autofocus was hugely and vastly improved over the previous cameras. They came up with new algorithms, new subject tracking, new everything, and so that created a lot of hype around the autofocus of this camera. And I kind of already discussed about that in my first impression video, but as first impression videos, that was just an initial idea of what I was thinking about the autofocus. In this video, we will only focus on that, and we will basically focus on three specific things: face tracking, and subject tracking with birds and with motorbikes or bicycles. Because I deeply tested the camera in those environments, and we can then extract how this camera work in all of the environment based off of what is going to come out of these tests. And so you will find below the chapters in the video, in the YouTube video, so that if you want to skip to something, you can do it. And at the end of the video, I will wrap my thoughts up, and we will come up with a general conclusion on how the autofocus is. Because you have probably watched a lot of videos, and you get from super excited comments to the X-H2s is worse than the X-T4. It's not even worth thinking about upgrading to it because it's not comparable to it, or it's just the same autofocus. And I would like to address those comments because I think most of the time people don't know what they're talking about. And so let's just dive into it. Starting with the face tracking. Now, face tracking was already available in the X-T4, so it's not probably the area where you expected most of the improvements, but there are still a lot of things to discuss because the face tracking enables better subject tracking. Because as you probably know, with the X-T4, which I've used with a lot of satisfaction for a long time, you could definitely track eyes, but at the same time, if you turned away from the camera wouldn't follow the body, it wouldn't follow the head. So you were either in the box that was tracking you, or you had no hope to be in focus. And even then, I mentioned that several times, the autofocus on the X-T4 would sometimes focus on, let's say, the background, the trees. That camera tends to see faces in trees where there's no faces at all. And so how is the X-H2s compared to the X-T4? Actually, how is the X-H2s in a vacuum? And then we will talk about how it is compared to the X-T4. And so let's dive into it and let's talk about it. It's going to take a while because I have a lot of stuff prepared for you, but it'll give you an idea of what to expect. So let's start with the easiest thing, the vlogging. Vlogging with a wide-angle lens, although it's at 1.4, so wide open. And I wanted to do that because I already showed you the 10-24, but I wanted to go wider and more complicated for the autofocus. But you can see the tracking is working super fine, even if it's wide open. When in a vlogging situation, it's doing super fine. And this is a compatible lens. This is not even a native Fuji lens. Changing with the 18-1.4 in the same situation, of course, the field of view is narrower, but the result doesn't change. The tracking works perfectly fine, even if I'm turning away it tracks me perfectly. It doesn't basically lose me. Never. Like, it never loses me. It's always perfect. Always, even if I turn around, it tracks the back of my head, and this was not doable before. Whoever has had a Fuji X-T4 knows that this was not doable. I then moved to a a little bit more complicated scene, still with a wide-angle lens, the Viltrox 13mm 1.4. I am playing, I can just say I'm playing Trickaboo, like someone said in my first impression video, and you can see it works. It works fine. It sometimes, when I walk away, you will see it. You will see it now. I'd say right after I come back. There you go. As I walk away, it tends to just lose me for a little bit, but then it tracks me again. But the performance is super fine, even when I'm running towards the camera, it's perfectly fine. I then moved from the same scene with the 18mm 1.4, always at 1.4. I wanted to make it complicated for the camera to do it. And again, don't look at color, don't look at nothing else but how it tracks me. And you can see, going towards the camera, it does super fine. It's super reliable. It's doing perfectly fine. Walking away, you see it freaked out a little bit over there. It's freaking out now, but then it tracks me well. So not 100% perfect, but very, very good. And then I moved to a really complicated scene with a longer lens, super backlit. And this is where the autofocus starts to struggle, because you can definitely tell that it's flickering on the back. And it does it until I'm close enough to the camera where it doesn't lose me again. And as you can see, that I'm walking away and it starts freaking out. And although I would have loved for this to be more reliable, I think this is something that can be fixed in a future firmware upgrade. And as you can see, once you're closer to the camera, it's not definitely going to lose you. I then changed, same scene. I fixed the exposure. I changed the parameters. In this case, I chose stickier tracking sensitivity and a much lower autofocus setting. And as you can see, it's still flickering, but a lot less. The problem with it is that it takes forever to get the focus, and it takes forever to go, as you can see now, to go to the background. And then when I'm back, as you can see right now, it takes forever to go back to me. So this is not a really usable setup for stuff like that. And it still wobbles to the background a little bit. It's not as dramatic as it was before, but it does it. I then changed again, high sensitivity. I sped up the autofocus, same scene. And as you can see, it flickers to the background. It is better than the first scene in this case, but again, it's not perfect. It's far from being perfect. We need to be honest with that. The tracking works perfectly fine if you're fairly close to the camera, but then, although the box in the screen, as you can see, it's there, the camera loses the confidence not to go everywhere and look for another subject. And this is something Fuji have struggled already in the past. It is better with this camera, but we're far from being perfect. I then moved with the same lens, the 33, to another scene where it's less backlit and it's already doing a lot better. Again, it's not perfect. You will see flickering a little bit like now, but it's doing a lot better than before. And again, once you get very decently close to the camera, it's not going to lose you anymore. As you walk away, you see it flickered a little bit, but it's better than when it's super backlit. Then again, I changed to a very slow autofocus speed with a high tracking sensitivity, and you see it doesn't flicker at all. but it's very slow to acquire focus and follow you. Again, this is not an ideal situation, but it's something, I mean, it's a way to mitigate that flickering issue, which is annoying, especially when it's backlit and you see the background basically turning on and off. That's not good. I then tried the 80mm macro, and I was expecting this not to be a good lens for this type of stuff, and it confirmed me pretty soon. As you can see, although the scene is not super backlit, the focus tracking with the face tracking is not super confident. It is decent, and I mean, we're talking about an 80mm lens, wide open, so the depth of field is basically nothing. That is a way to complicate the camera's life a lot, and you can see it lost me a little bit. And so, yeah, this is not a great solution. I bet the 90mm would do better, but I didn't have it, so that's pretty much it. So the camera is not good for playing trickable. But I then wanted to see if the trees were the reason for that behavior of the camera. So I decided to try again with the 33mm in my backyard to see if it would do better. And it lost me when I started walking away from the camera, but you can see now that it's doing a lot better. You will see now I appear again. It was a little bit not sure at the beginning and it lost me now, but it's way better than it was in the woods. I repeated the same test several times, and what you're seeing right now, it's pretty much reliable representation of what happens every time. The camera in a situation which is better lit tracks a lot better. In a situation that is less confusing, tracks a lot better. Well, as you've probably seen, the camera is not perfect. And I would kind of expect that because this is the first time that Fuji is implementing this advanced AI autofocus system. And so I would expect that the first iteration wouldn't be perfect. I expect firmware upgrades to make it better over time, and that's what AI is supposed to do. And I also expect a little bit of tweaks, not just in the tracking algorithm, but also in the precision and the decision of the autofocus. Because as you've seen in those videos that I showed you, the camera can track. The box stays on what you need to track. It definitely recognizes what you need to track, but at the same time, if you're not close enough, despite the box being on you or the person that you're willing to track, the camera sometimes flickers back and forth with the background. And this is not because, like the X-T4 was seeing faces in the background, but it's because, I don't know, probably the autofocus system is not as confident as it may be probably with other brands. But again, I don't know other brands as much as I know Fuji, so I may estimate what other brands can do. Someone that uses other brands can let me know in the comments below. But those that say that this camera performs as well or as worse as the X-T4 did, or third person are wrong. Like, there's no way around. There's no way you can compare what the X-H2s can do compared to what the X-T4 can do, because there is a night and day difference. You could not turn away and hope that the camera would focus. You could not do what I did in this test without hoping for the best and hoping that luck would assist you. So there's no way you can consider the X-T4 face tracking as good as it is the one on the X-H2, and I guess the one on the X-H, I meant the X-H2s, and I guess the one on the X-H2, because again, it's night and day difference. I was hired to be part of a team that filmed a mountain bike competition in South Italy, south of Italy, and I was requested, and that's what you're gonna see in the video that I'm gonna show you in a bit. That I was requested to deliver 1080 50 frame per second files. So I don't have the 4K version of what I shot because I couldn't convert everything in time. I had to deliver the memory card with that kind of file format. So again, I was hired to do that. I had to obey to what I was asked. But this doesn't mean that I couldn't test the camera. And so let me show you a little bit of a montage, short montage that I did about it, and then we'll talk about how did I find it using it. Now, looking at that montage, you probably think that the camera is doing great, and it did great. In that specific situation, the camera did great, but it's not necessarily perfect. And so I want to show you part of what I screen recorded while I was shooting the video to kind of talk to you through what I saw while I was recording, what I can tell by looking at both the screen recording and the footage. So in this first scene, you see it's a pretty slow cyclist going towards the camera, which is set on a tripod in between the trees with a long lens, and the camera tracks perfectly fine, and then it switches to the second cyclist once the first is out of the frame. Then same scene, different situation. There's two cyclists at this time. It sticks with the first one that came in the frame, although he gets overtaken, but it tracks really good. Here we have three subjects. It stays on the first, then it switches on the second, and then it switches on the third, and then again on the second. In this one here, it stays on the second one, then it goes back to the first, and then it tracks him pretty perfectly, and then it moves to the second one. So very good. In this case, you see it's tracking a face, although that face is not on a bicycle or a motorbike. Here we have a different scene where the subject pretty much goes behind the tree, but the camera tracks perfectly fine. And then in this scene is a slow cyclist, but you see it gets tracked, although there's subjects in between, and the camera is capable of tracking the subject fine. In this case, we have a lot of subjects. This is the most complicated for the camera. You see it switches back and forth between different heads, but it never loses the focus for real. I then moved to another area. This is far more complicated. You see 2000 ISO, so very complicated. The camera tracks pretty good when the subject is fairly close, but if you see in the distance, in this case, it tracks pretty good in any case. It stays on the first, then it goes on the second, and then it goes on the third, and it never loses them. This was a really nice result from the camera. Then I moved the frame a little bit on the right, and that's where the camera started to freak out, and you see it's going back and forth until up to a certain point, then it tracks the subject, and when it's close enough, it doesn't lose it. And you see that again repeated here. It goes back and forth, but up to a certain point, which is here, it stops losing it and it keeps following it pretty consistently. In this case, there are two, or I guess three, no, it's two subjects. It stays on the first, then it moves on the second, then it goes again on the first, and it tracks pretty consistently, although it loses it in a little bit, and then it goes back, and when it's close enough, it doesn't lose it. And again, here it goes on the second one, and it doesn't get lost. As you've seen, the camera again is not perfect, and it can use some improvement. But then again, stuff like that would never be possible, but I mean never be possible with the X-T4. So again, whoever says that the autofocus systems are on the same level either lies or don't know what is talking about. There's no way out of it. Are there other cameras that are better around? Probably. I would assume that probably Sony and Canon are doing better. I don't know about Nikon. I haven't tested those cameras. But again, this capabilities, shooting, delivering, tracking bikes in the woods with a telephoto lens, because everything was shot on the 70-300. Don't forget about it. It was not possible with the X-T4 at all. Like, there was no chance you could do anything like that. Now, it's not all about bikes or motorcycles or face tracking. It is also about bird autofocus, bird tracking, bird subject recognition. And especially one of the YouTube channel was super showed a lot of criticism against the Fuji subject tracking when it comes to birds. And I was curious because I quickly tested it already and it didn't give me that impression, but I wanted to dedicate more time to it. And so I went for an entire day of wildlife photography. Now, take in consideration, I am not a wildlife photographer at all. I only have the 70-300, I don't have the 150-600, and I, again, not being a wildlife photographer, I may have done a lot of mistakes that an experienced wildlife photographer wouldn't have done. But again, I was able to record a lot of footage, and I want to show you what I could capture. Now, again, that montage, everything seems super beautiful. Of course, the camera sometimes is not as good as that montage shows, and I want to talk to you about that in a bit. But that footage, aside from being beautiful to look at, this is the quality of the Fuji video files, shows you that the camera can definitely track birds, and it can do it really, really good. Now, let's go to some screen recording, and we will discuss that while we see that on the screen.
So as you can see, the flamingo here is dancing, weird things, doing a weird thing. And again, I'm not an expert, but you see the tracking is doing pretty fine, although the head is down in the water. It's still tracking the body pretty decently. Oh, there were a few occasions where it moved to the back, but overall, you see we're recording 4K 120 here, and you see, so we're stressing the camera. And you see that it's tracking perfectly fine. I don't know if other cameras from other brands are capable of doing better than this. I may assume they are, but overall, as you can see, the flamingo is moving around, and it's not super fast, but it's moving erratically, and the head is disappearing and then appearing again. The camera is striking fine. Apologies for the shake, but the 70 to 300 at 300 millimeters without a monopod, that's what you get, despite the you see that now it flicked back and forth, but then it went back to the subject. And as you can see, I started overheating the camera. It was pretty warm outside. We were above 30 Celsius degrees. I was shooting for a long time between photos and videos. Now you see, this is a way smaller bird, and it's striking it pretty good. Although there's some obstacles in between. You see in the lower left corner there was an obstacle that was darkening the scene. But again, it's doing fine. It's doing really fine. And again, I am screen recording. I'm in 4K 120. The camera is already warm, and it's not breaking a sweat. Now, again, we'll see at the end that it's never perfect. But again, small bird facing the opposite way, so it's pretty much tracking the bird. But again, it's tracking it. So, as I mentioned before, I don't know how people can say that this camera is comparable or worse than the X-T4. Whoever is using X-T4 knows that something like that was not possible. The focus would have drifted based on the water ripples, and it would have been lost forever. Here again, super small bird. I'm very close here, so it makes everything more complicated. You see, I'm overheating the camera. It would turn off after a couple of minutes. Now, is it always like that? Is it always perfect? No, it's not. And we're seeing it right now. Sometimes you see it's lost it for a moment. So again, and this is the scene that I was surprised the most about, because it was a fairly simple scene, but the camera freaked out. It couldn't recognize the subject. It is weird because other moments it was doing fine, but then again, this is where the camera can use some improvement. Now you see it's doing fine. It was a moment where it lost it, but again, so yeah, it's not perfect, but it's way better than any other Fuji camera has ever been, but miles better. Okay, so that was my interpretation of what goes on with the camera. And as you can see, I was overheating the camera, or also because it was super warm that day, and a lot of stuff. I mean, I was putting the camera through heavy duty, and while recording 4K 120, the camera started to overheat. It is what it is. But when it comes to autofocus, aside from those few clips where it freaked out, and that surprised me, I must admit that surprised me, but the camera does really good. And
again, those scenes were impossible to capture with an X-T4 unless you were manually focusing, because whoever has used the X-T4 to do that knows that the subject tracking, the autofocus tracking, although you had the box, would be tricked by the ripples on the water, and it would go somewhere else, and you would lose completely track of the bird. I have tried many times with the X-T4 and I never succeeded to get anything like that. It's night and day difference. Again, it's a night and day difference. But it's not just about video. As of now, I've only shown you the video. How about pictures? I couldn't take pictures of the bikes because I was recording just video, but I could take a lot of pictures of birds. And I wanted to, and I want you to have a look at this slideshow, just to let you understand what you can do. Now, then again, that slideshow shows you the best. I had pictures that were out of focus, but the overall impression that I got is that the camera can definitely track really good. And I have a couple of sequences that I want to show you, where we basically have one sequence. I'm following flamingo. It's 160 shots, 160 shots. And I got, between the head being perfectly in focus or the majority of the body being perfectly in focus, I got more than 50% of those. I got another 25% of photos that were usable in a pinch, because it was focused on the, let's just say, on the wing, and only a quarter of them was out of focus. But then again, it was out of focus, slightly out of focus. It never lost the subject at all. And the same thing I can tell you for a sequence with a seagull that was flying low, so in an even more complicated scenario, I got similar result. It was a 40 picture sequence, so a much shorter sequence. But something like that with the X-T4 was super complicated to get, especially for someone like me that is not a wildlife photographer. So in conclusion, what do I think about this camera? Is it any good? Is it any better than the X-T4? Well, yes, it's night and day difference with the X-T4. You can definitely trust this camera a lot more than you could do with the X-T4, especially when it comes to subject tracking. I still miss the possibility of tracking a random object by tapping on the screen. And again, it's something you can do that you can do in photos, but you cannot do in video. I would love for Fuji to implement that also for video, because it would be super helpful. And I mentioned that already in my first impression video. But other than that, the camera focuses really good. Is it perfect? Not at all. It definitely needs some improvement, especially when you see those areas where there's a busy background. The camera can be tricked, can be unsure of what to focus on. But other than that, the camera is super usable in a normal usage scenario. When you have a subject that you're filming, you're tracking with a purpose, not just randomly placing a tripod in the woods and playing trickaboo, as I said, the camera works fine. And if the subject is big enough in the frame, the camera will never hesitate. So I think on one hand, Fuji is making the mistake to indicate the box around the subject, even though that subject is not super clear to the camera, or if the autofocus cannot just define where to nail the focus. I don't know if it's a mistake or something. I think that can definitely be tweaked. But in general, the autofocus of this camera is really, really good. I will talk about the rest of the camera in the full review, which I'm working on. But I wanted this video to be focused only on autofocus because there have been so many wild information about this autofocus system that I wanted to clarify what this system can do and cannot do. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Leave me a thumbs up if you liked it, because this helps a lot the algorithm, and share the video because again this helps the algorithm. One more thing, if you find this video useful and you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing, because again it helps me growing the channel and potentially ask for lenses to test, because I cannot buy everything with my own money. I have limits and I'm pretty much there. And in general, I'll try to answer to all of the questions that you may have. Just again, comment below and let me know what you think. That's it for today. Ciao, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.